Guys, I'm really happy to welcome to the podcast a friend of mine and actually, a hero of mine. This is Larry Elder. He's been called the sage from South Central, and that probably gives you an idea of someone who's 100 years old. Larry is very young. He's a best-selling author, documentary filmmaker, newspaper columnist. He was host of the nationally syndicated show, The Larry Elder Show. He ran for governor of California in the recent recall election. Larry's also the executive producer of Uncle Tom 2, a movie that if you haven't seen, you should. Uncle Tom 2 is the movie. Larry, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. You have been talking about the theme of fatherlessness as a core problem in the Black community now for some time. I thought of you in the recent kind of skirmish between Herschel Walker and his son Christian Walker. Christian Walker launches this kind of tirade against his dad, but behind it was, I think, and Christian at one point even says, he goes, it's not easy to grow up fatherless. So I wonder if you could comment, if you will, on what's happening with Herschel Walker, how you think about that particular controversy, but then we'll talk about the broader problem, which has been really your forte.
Well, Dinesh, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. You were kind enough not to also mention that I'm called the black face of white supremacy. And finally, I've never called my producer honey, so I'm assuming your producer is Debbie, your wife.
Yes, exactly.
Because otherwise, I'm going to send a text to Debbie.
Oh, yes. Well, our other cameraman is Rohan, so I certainly don't refer to him that way.
Now, as for Herschel Walker, I know about the friction he has with his son. As you know, for 10 years, I didn't speak to my own father, even though my father was in the house, was a good man. I just completely misunderstood his anger because he was tired. He worked 2 full-time jobs. He cooked for a family on the weekend to make additional money because he wanted to have a stay-at-home mom, even though he had a dual janitor's salary. And my dad also went to night school a couple nights a week to get his GED because he was literally thrown out of the house when he was 13 years old. My point is, it's not easy being a father, as you well know, and kids often go through a period where they're upset with their family, with their father. So you really don't know the backstory. Bottom line is, Herschel Walker, as I have been, talks about the importance of the family, the importance of fathers. 70% of Black kids enter the world today without a father married to the mother. That number was only, in a quote, 25% in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world without a father married to the mother. Half Hispanic kids and 40% of all American kids do. It is, in my opinion, the number one social problem we're facing in America. We got a lot of problems, crime, drugs, all sorts of things. But the number one problem facing America socially is the growing number of kids who enter the world without a father married to the mother. And that is something that we tackle a lot in Uncle Tom 2. We talked, Dinesh, in Uncle Tom 1 about how, despite horrific obstacles, Black people kept moving forward after slavery. Why? A belief in family. It was rare for a kid to be born without a father in the house. Belief in Judeo-Christian values. A belief in patriotism, even as America was not living up to its ideals. And a belief in entrepreneurship, to the point where in 1940, 87% of Blacks lived below the poverty line. 20 years later, 1960, before the Civil Rights Acts, before much of the civil rights legislation, that number had fallen to 47%. That's a 40-point drop in 20 years, arguably the greatest 20-year period of economic growth for Blacks in the history of this country. Now, fast forward, we have Black Lives Matter that 85% of Black people support. On their website, they trashed the nuclear family. They embraced Karl Marx, who did not believe in God, hated religion, and also hated private property and hated entrepreneurship. So the foundations that made Black people still endure after slavery, despite horrific obstacles, are now under attack by the left, by socialists, by collectivists, by those who want to redistribute income, and by organizations like Black Lives Matter. And we tackle that in Uncle Tom 2, which, by the way, is available on uncletom.com.
I mean, Larry, what you're saying, it goes so much against the idea. The prevailing narrative, of course, is that Blacks were downtrodden, they had slavery, then it transmuted into segregation, and it wasn't until the civil rights movement came along that we began to see progress for the first time, Blacks entering the middle class. You're telling a different history. What you're really saying is that, first of all, Blacks made a heroic effort after the Civil War to reunite their families, and for much of the 20th century, the Black family was relatively intact. And then you're saying that there was really a massive spurt of economic progress prior to the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement, if anything, only continued, perhaps even slowed down the pace of that progress. I think this history is absolutely critical because it sets the stage for what we believe about today. So would you say that Uncle Tom too kind of navigates between the past and the present, relating the one to the other and then pointing to the future?
Absolutely. And everything you said was beautifully stated, and I agree with it 100%. In last year, Dinesh, I'm watching the Super Bowl, and there's a Citigroup commercial. And there's a black guy who's talking about Black Wall Street and how in 1921, the Tulsa Massacre destroyed Black Wall Street. What he didn't tell you are two things. That area was completely rebuilt in about 3 to 5 years without one dime of government money. And secondly, it was not referred to as Black Wall Street until after it was rebuilt. And the point is, there were all sorts of so-called Black Wall Streets all over America. It is a lie that that blacks were downtrodden until the civil rights movement came along. And then all of a sudden we realized that we could realize our potential to some degree. And then the white man put his knee again on our necks, figuratively, as in the case of George Floyd. It's a big, fat lie. And Uncle Tom, too, exposes the big fat lie. You see all sorts of archival footage never shown before of black people, entrepreneurs, what happened in Harlem in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. People from the South came to the North and bought property to the point where white people were complaining about black gentrification in Harlem. So the civil rights, the war on poverty that Lyndon Johnson launched in the mid-'60s was, in my opinion, one of the greatest mistakes ever made in America. What we've done from 65 until now is incentivize women to marry the government and incentivize men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And if you look at the spending since the civil rights, since the war on poverty in the mid-'60s, it's over $22 trillion. And you look at a graph and you see parallel lines of the growth of kids being born outside of wedlock with the amount of money being spent to essentially reward women for marrying the government and for abandoning the men in their lives.
Let's take a short pause. When we come back, more with Larry Elder.